There is a specific kind of silence that only exists within walls that have stood for 300 years. Listen closely, beyond the heavy iron-bound oak of this door. The valley of Oakhaven is slowly disappearing under a vast, seamless shroud of white, but here, within these stone boundaries, the air is thick with the comforting scent of dried valerian, and the slow, rhythmic pulse of a hearth fire that has not gone out since the very first frost of autumn. You have found your way back to the Apothecary, and the restless, chaotic world outside no longer has any claim on you. The snow falls without a sound, layer upon layer, muffling the footsteps of history, leaving only the soft crackle of seasoned wood and the steady, quiet breathing of a house that has seen 1,000 winters just like this one. My name is Lyra, and like the long line of weary keepers who sat in this high-backed chair before me, I have learned to measure my life, not in the frantic ticking of seconds or minutes, but in the slow, patient maturation of tinctures and the steady, inevitable accumulation of snow upon the eaves. Today is the eve of the Great Yule Festival, a tradition rooted so deeply in the soil of this valley that it is older than the stone bridge arching over the frozen river at the edge of town. As I run my hand slowly along the surface of the main counter, I can feel every groove and every dip worn into the dark wood by a century of porcelain jars, copper scales, and the leaning weight of those seeking comfort. It is a texture of survival, a physical map of every person who has ever stepped through that door, looking for a cure or a moment of peace. Tonight, we are not merely preparing medicine. We are the silent curators of a winter legacy that stretches back into the mist of time. I have spent the early hours of this morning meticulously checking our stores, moving with a deliberate slowness to ensure that the silver root is brittle enough and the glimmer moss has retained its soft, subterranean glow through the deep freeze. In this shop, everything has a place, a history, and a sacred purpose. The jars are settled on their shelves like old friends, their glass surfaces catching the amber flicker of the firelight in a way that feels almost hypnotic. There is no urgency here, no demand for your attention beyond the simple grounding reality of the present moment. The biting wind may howl against the chimney stones, trying to find a way inside, but it will not succeed. The hearth fire is particularly stubborn today, devouring heavy logs of seasoned oak with a low, guttural vibration that settles deep within the chest, anchoring you to the floorboards. It is the only sound that truly matters now, the heartbeat of the room. I have laid out the great leather-bound ledger, the one with the heavy iron clasps that Kale handed to me years ago. Its pages yellowed like autumn leaves and smelling faintly of old dust and pressed flowers. The ink in the well is rich, dark and cool, waiting patiently for the very first record of the day to be etched into its surface. Before the village fully wakes, before the first iron bells ring out from the chapel for the morning prayer, there is this sacred, narrow window of time where the shop belongs only to the long shadows and the rising curls of herbal steam. I find myself lingering in this half-light, watching the way the frost carves intricate, fractal landscapes across the window panes, delicate forests of ice that mirror the world outside, but in a way that is silent and motionless. It is a time for reflection, for letting the mind drift like a fallen leaf on a still pond. We are standing at the threshold of something significant, yet there is no need to rush toward it. The preparations for the festival will come in their own time. For now, there is only the warmth of the wood, the scent of the herbs, and the steady scratch of a quill about to meet the page. Every movement I make is intentional. Every breath is a slow descent into a deeper state of calm. You are safe here, nestled within the history of Oakhaven, while the rest of the world is hushed by the falling snow. As the ink flows from the nib of my pen, we begin the ritual of the day, turning the first page of a story that has been told many times before, yet feels as fresh as the white landscape waiting beyond the door. The steady, rhythmic scratch of a quill against heavy parchment is the only sound that truly belongs to this gray pre-dawn hour. It is a dry, textured whisper, the sound of ink meeting thick wood pulp, a slow and tactile conversation between the past records and the present silence. Each stroke of the metal nib feels deliberate, a small, dark anchor in the drifting quiet of the morning. I lean over the great ledger, the weight of the ancient, leather-bound book pressing firmly against the cool dark oak of the counter. The parchment beneath my hand is thick and slightly rough, aged over decades to a soft cream color that catches and holds the amber glow of the hearth fire. As I record the date in a slow, looping script, I can feel the subtle, grounding vibration of the quill through my fingertips, a sensation that tells me the day has finally, officially begun. There is a deep, quiet satisfaction in this act of documentation, in the transformation of a chaotic storehouse of herbs into neat, orderly rows of ink. I set the quill aside for a moment, letting the dark ink dry into the grain of the paper, and turn my attention to the high shelves that line the walls like the sturdy ribs of an ancient weathered ship. My hands move with a memory of their own, reaching for the heavy jars of silver root. These roots are brittle and cool to the touch, smelling faintly of deep, undisturbed earth and frozen autumn rain. I count them one by one, their pale, metallic sheen shimmering softly in the dim light of the dying candles. Next comes the glimmer moss, stored carefully in dark cobalt glass to preserve its delicate subterranean luminescence. When I lift the heavy lid, a faint, ethereal green glow spills out, painting my palms in the ghostly color of a deep forest at twilight. It is a soft, living light, one that hums with a quiet, ancient energy that has traveled from the dampest, hidden caves of the valley to settle here, in my care. I move on to the winterberry, the dried fruits appearing like tiny, shriveled rubies against the white porcelain of the measuring bowl. Each berry is a concentrated burst of a forgotten summer sun, held in stasis, waiting patiently to be ground into a fine powder that can break a lingering fever or bring the color of life back to a pale, wintry cheek. This inventory is a slow ritual of touch and scent, a way of checking the very pulse of the shop. I move down the line, my fingers grazing the parchment labels I have written by hand over the years: peppermint, valerian, crushed elderbark, and dried nettle. But as I reach the lower shelf, where the heavier stoneware crocks are kept in the shadows, my hand finds only empty space. The jar of honey fruit preserves, which I had carefully sealed with fresh wax only 2 days ago, is not where it belongs. I find it tucked away behind a large bundle of drying sage, the seal broken and a single, small, sticky paw print marking the rim of the jar. I do not need to look far to find the culprit of this minor heist. Luna is draped across the very top of the rolling ladder, her thick orange fur, a bright, warm contrast against the dark, stained wood. She does not even have the grace to look guilty. She simply stretches her long limbs, her claws kneading the cool air in a slow, rhythmic motion, her golden eyes half closed in a state of pure, sugary bliss. She is the true master of this apothecary, a creature of absolute comfort, who understands better than I ever will that some things in this life are meant to be enjoyed immediately, not just cataloged and stored away on a shelf. I shake my head slowly, a small, private smile tugging at the corners of my lips, and reach for a damp linen cloth to clean the evidence of her theft. The frustration I should feel is entirely absent, replaced instead by a warm, pervasive sense of companionship that fills the quiet gaps between the heavy shelves. With the ledger finally updated and the rogue jar resealed, I begin the task of organizing the new shipments of glass vials. This is perhaps the most soothing part of my morning routine. I take them one by one from the straw-lined wooden crates, their surfaces cool, crystalline, and perfectly smooth against my skin. One by one, I place them onto the polished oak shelves. Each vial makes a soft, melodic clink as it meets its neighbor, a delicate, crystalline chime that rings through the quiet room like a tiny silver bell. Clink, 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 it is a scale of glass, a shimmering, translucent army, standing at attention in the shadows. The sound is clean and sharp, yet strangely gentle, a constant reminder of the fragility and the clarity of the work we perform here. I align them until the rails are perfectly straight, the orange firelight dancing through the curves of the glass, creating 100 miniature, flickering suns along the stone wall. Everything is in its rightful place. The roots are counted. The moss is glowing with a steady light, and the vials are ready to be filled with the decoctions of the coming festival. The shop feels balanced, a silent, clockwork machine of herbs and glass, waiting for the first breath of the outside world to set it in motion. I take a deep, slow breath, inhaling the heavy scent of the drying sage and the fading, sweet smoke of the candles, letting the stillness of the room settle into my very bones. But then, that heavy stillness is suddenly fractured. It is not a loud noise, but in the muffled, snow-covered world of Oakhaven, it stands out like a shout in the dark. Far off, at the very edge of the village where the snow drifts are deepest, there is the unmistakable sound of heavy iron-rimmed wheels grinding against frozen stone. It is a slow, rhythmic thudding, accompanied by the distant, rhythmic jingle of an iron harness and the labored snort of a horse pushing through the heavy drifts. The sound grows louder, more deliberate, drawing closer to the frozen center of town with every passing second. It is not the light, rickety bounce of a common village cart. It is the heavy authoritative roll of a carriage made of solid, dark wood and reinforced steel. Wait, do you hear that? The sound has stopped. It has not faded away into the distance. It has come to a full, heavy halt right outside our door. The silence that follows is even deeper and more profound than before. A bated breath that hangs in the cold air, waiting for the very first knock to fall upon the oak. The heavy, lingering vibration of the carriage wheels remains embedded in the old floorboards even long after the mechanical sound has ceased. A low, rhythmic hum that vibrates through the soles of my boots and up into my very bones. I move slowly toward the front window, my breath hitching for a brief second as I press my warm palm against the cool, weeping glass to clear a small, circular portal in the thick condensation. Through the fogged pane, the world of Oakhaven looks like a delicate charcoal sketch, all muted grays and soft whites, except for one jarring, impossible splash of saturated color. Emerging from the winter mist is a carriage of deep, royal purple A shade, so vibrant and so defiant that it seems to bruise the very pristine whiteness of the falling snow. It is a color of ancient luxury, of high-walled southern cities and sun-drenched ports, a color that has no logical business appearing in our quiet, wood-smoke-stained valley on the cold eve of July. The door of the carriage swings open with a heavy, oiled grace, and a woman steps down into the fresh, waist-high drifts. She is Seraphina. Even from across the narrow street, her presence is commanding. She is wrapped in a thick, flowing coat of midnight violet, the hem lined with silver fox fur that brushes softly against the tops of her polished, dark leather boots. She does not struggle with the deep snow. She moves through it with a slow, deliberate grace, as if she has already tamed the very landscape with her arrival. Following closely behind her is a young man, Leo. His arms piled high with gilded crates and velvet-wrapped bundles that seem to glow with their own internal light. He is her apprentice, though in this light, he looks more like a weary traveler carrying the silent weight of an entire kingdom upon his shoulders. He stumbles slightly, his breath escaping in long white plumes, but Seraphina does not look back. Her gaze is fixed upward, surveying the dormant, timber-framed building directly opposite my own. And then, there's the dog, a sleek, powerful Rottweiler named Bear. His coat is so perfectly black that it seems to absorb the dim winter light, making him look like a solid shadow that has detached itself from the underside of the carriage. He does not bark, nor does he bound through the drifts like the common village curs. He stands perfectly still at Seraphina's side, his massive, noble head turning slowly as he scans the empty street with a quiet, terrifyingly human intelligence. He is a guardian of silk and steel, a silent, breathing sentinel that reinforces the aura of untouchable prestige surrounding his mistress. They stand there for a long, frozen moment, a strange and vibrant tableau against the humble backdrop of our village, looking like characters who have stepped out of an illuminated manuscript and into the cold mud and jagged ice of our reality. The mystery of their arrival is solved with a sudden sharp clarity that makes the very air in my lungs feel colder than the frost outside. Serafina reaches back into the carriage and pulls out a sign, not a hand-painted wooden board like mine, but a masterpiece of etched crystal and polished gleaming brass. With Leo's strained help, she hangs it carefully above the door of the old, empty bakery that has stood vacant and silent since the last spring thaw. Even through the veil of falling snow, the gold leaf lettering catches the faint, flickering light of my own hearth fire from across the way. The crystal vial, a rival shop, an apothecary of light and glass opening its doors just 20 paces from where I stand. The realization settles in my stomach like a cold stone. We have been the beating heart of Oakhaven for generations, the sole providers of every remedy, from the common winter cold to the deepest, most inconsolable grief. And now, in the single blink of an eye, the familiar landscape of my life has shifted. I feel a heavy hand settle on my shoulder, its weight familiar, warm, and steadying. Kale has moved up silently behind me, his eyes narrowing as he looks through the cleared patch of glass at our new, colorful neighbors. He does not pull away in anger, nor does he curse the sudden intrusion upon our peace. Instead, he lets out a long, slow sigh that smells faintly of the peppermint tea he drinks every morning by the fire. His voice, when it finally comes, is like the deep, low rumble of the earth, calm, weathered, and entirely unshaken by the spectacle outside. He tells me that Flash is like a summer storm. It dazzles the eyes and makes a great deal of noise, but it passes as quickly and as quietly as it arrived. Quality, he whispers, is like the mountain itself. It does not need to shout to be felt. It is in the slow steeped bark, the hand-crushed leaves, and the patient, silent waiting that defines our ancient craft. He reminds me that the people of Oakhaven know the deep difference between a potion that merely glitters and a medicine that truly heals the soul. His words are a balm, a gentle return to safety that pulls me back from the sharp edge of my rising anxiety. I look down at my own hands, stained faintly green from the silver root, and I feel the strength of the 300 years of history resting beneath my feet. We are the foundation. She is merely the ornament upon the eaves. I watch as Serafina turns a silver key in the lock of her new domain, her movements fluid and confident, while Leo begins to unload more crates of shimmering, multicolored glass that clinks softly in the cold air. They are efficient, they are beautiful, and they are undeniably new. But as the first village chimneys begin to puff with the heavy fires of breakfast, I see the heavy curtains of the neighboring houses begin to twitch. I see the baker's wife peeking out from her doorway, her eyes wide with a new kind of hunger. I see the stable boy stop his shoveling to stare at the purple carriage. The safety of the morning's silence is gone, replaced by a restless, electric hum of anticipation. Bakel may be right about the mountain, but the storm is here now, and it is a beautiful thing to behold. The fire in our hearth is still warm, and the jars on our shelves are still full, but the air in the village has shifted. The peace of Oakhaven has been punctured, and already, despite the early hour, I can hear the village starting to whisper. The heavy oak door creaks slowly on its ancient iron hinges, and the shop bell lets out a sharp silver jingle that cuts through the thick, honey-like silence of the morning. A sudden biting gust of winter air follows, carrying with it the frantic, restless energy of the village square. Mrs. Hattle enters, a whirlwind of damp wool and breathless gossip wrapped so tightly in her. knitted scarves and thick, oversized mittens that she looks more like a wandering bundle of yarn than a living person. She stomps her heavy boots against the threshold, sending sprays of dry, crystalline snow skittering across the dark floorboards I had so carefully swept only an hour ago. Her face is flushed a deep, wind-burnt red, but her eyes are unnaturally bright with the kind of electric excitement that only a scandal or a grand novelty can provide to a quiet life. She does not even wait for a formal greeting. She begins to speak before she has even finished unwinding the very first layer of her long woolen scarf, her voice a hushed, rhythmic trill that seems to vibrate within the small, timbered space of the apothecary. She leans heavily over the polished counter, the sharp smell of damp wool and cold northern wind clinging to her like a second skin. She tells me, in short, punctuated gasps, that the crystal doors of the crystal vial have officially opened to the public, and that the interior is unlike anything the people of Oakhaven have ever witnessed in all their generations. She speaks of velvet-lined pedestals and silver-framed mirrors that catch and refract the light in ways that feel almost otherworldly, but it is the medicine itself she is truly enchanted by. She describes something called starshine balm, a glowing salve kept in tiny, faceted jars that supposedly pulses with a soft, rhythmic light even in the absolute darkness of a cellar. According to her breathless account, the balm does not just soothe a winter burn or a shallow scratch. It makes the skin itself shimmer with a faint luminescence, leaving behind a lingering scent of crushed jasmine and fallen starlight. She tells me of narrow bottles that look like they have been filled with moving liquid silver, potions that swirl with a restless life of their own, catching the dim winter light and magnifying it until the entire shop feels like it is submerged deep underwater. Bottled starlight, she calls it, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper, as if she is genuinely afraid the very clay jars on my own shelves might overhear her betrayal. The body of her story grows more elaborate with every deep breath she takes. She mentions the baker's youngest son, who went in only an hour ago with a persistent, hacking winter cough and walked out minutes later, claiming his throat felt as clear and cool as a mountain spring after only a single drop of a brilliant, violet-colored elixir. Das. She talks of the blacksmith's wife, who purchased a small vial of something called liquid sleep, and claimed she had not rested so deeply or so peacefully in 40 years. These remedies are incredibly fast-acting, Serafina tells the villagers. They are flashy, they are immediate, and they are wrapped in the kind of high-born elegance that makes our traditional, earth-stained craft look old, dusty, and tired. Mrs. Hattle's hands, still encased in those thick, clumsy mittens, gesture wildly as she describes the way the villagers are already beginning to flock across the street, drawn in by the promise of instant results and the sheer, dazzling spectacle of it all. It is not just simple curiosity, I begin to realize. It is a profound enchantment of the senses. They are enamored not just with the promise of a cure, but with the grand, expensive theater of the cure. As I stand and listen to her, I find myself instinctively retreating into the heavy sensory reality of my own domain, seeking a quiet return to safety amidst the rising, cold tide of her frantic words. Behind me, a large, weathered copper pot sits patiently on the iron hearth, filled to the brim with a slow simmering decoction of valerian root, dried apple skins, and elderberry. The steam rises from it in slow, lazy, hypnotic curls, smelling deeply of the autumn woods, damp soil, and the inherent sweetness of the earth. It is a heavy, humid, and honest scent, one that settles deep within the lungs and naturally slows the heart to a more peaceful rhythm. The contrast is sharp and undeniable. Outside, there is the cold, piercing gossip of the new and the flashy. Here, there is only the warm, protective herbal fog of the tried and the true. I look at my own jars, simple, clear glass or sturdy, hand-thrown stoneware, each labeled in my own plain, honest script. They do not glow in the dark. They do not shimmer with liquid silver. They simply sit there in the shadows, holding the concentrated essence of the seasons, waiting for the patient, slow process of nature to begin its work. I reach out a hand and slowly adjust a jar of dried lavender, the cool glass feeling familiar and solid under my fingertips. The steam from the copper pot brushes against my face like a gentle, moist veil, a soft touch that blurs the sharp, jagged edges of Mrs. Hattle's excitement. I try with all my might to hold on to Bacale's quiet words about the mountain and the storm, but it is a difficult task when the storm is being described to me as a modern miracle. Mrs. Hattle finally pauses to catch her breath, her bright eyes searching mine for some kind of reaction, for a sign of professional jealousy, or perhaps a desperate counterclaim of my own. I give her only a small, polite nod. My voice remains low and calm as I offer her a small tin of our standard hand-pressed Yuletide lozenges made from honey and horehound. She takes them, but I can see her gaze already drifting back toward the window, back toward the purple carriage and the glass sign that glitters so brightly in the falling snow. When she finally leaves, the shop bell jingles one last time, and the silence that returns to the room feels much heavier than before, laden with the damp, cold scent of her melting snow and the lingering static of her words. The fire in the hearth pops softly, a single bright spark dying out on the cold stone apron. I stand there for what feels like an age, the herbal steam swirling around me like a protective, fragrant shroud. I look again at the long row of vials I organized so carefully earlier this morning. They are perfect in their simplicity, but they are entirely silent. They do not promise starlight or instant transformation. They only promise the slow, steady, and often difficult work of nature. But a small, persistent seed of restlessness has been planted deep within my mind. It is not just about the competition or the loss of a few customers. It is about the ancient science we serve. I begin to wonder what she is truly using to make a simple balm glow with its own light. How can a violet elixir clear a heavy chest in a single minute without some hidden, metabolic cost to the body? My thoughts keep returning to her recipe book, the one I saw through the window, resting so casually on her velvet-covered counter. I think of the loom leaf she mentioned, and the strange, metallic, ozone-like scents that drifted from her door as she opened it. The entire village is whispering now, and for the first time in my life, I find that I am whispering too, not with my voice, but with the restless, searching parts of my own mind. The warmth and safety of my shop are no longer enough to quiet the intense, burning curiosity that is gnawing at me from the inside. I look across the snowy street at the flickering, artificial lights of the crystal vial, and I realize with a heavy heart that before the sun finally sets on this long eve of Yule, I need to know exactly what she is really brewing in those shimmering glass jars. The blue hour has long since faded into a deep, bruised indigo, and the village of Oakhaven has finally surrendered to the heavy, silent weight of the midwinter night. I stand in the darkened front room of my apothecary, the only light coming from the dying, glowing embers of the hearth, which cast long, flickering shadows that dance like silent ancient ghosts against the endless rows of stoneware jars. I find myself drawn, almost against my own will, to the cold glass of the window. Across the narrow, snow-choked street, the crystal vial does not sleep. Even now, past the hour when all honest folk have doused their candles and retreated into the safety of their quilts, her shop glows with an unnatural, hypnotic luminescence. It is not the warm, dancing orange of a wood fire. It is a steady, pulsing violet radiance that seems to bleed through the crystalline glass of her windows and stain the pristine, white snow outside. It looks as if a fallen star has been trapped within those timbered walls, breathing a rhythmic artificial light that makes the rest of the dark street look decayed, gray, and forgotten. I look down at my own blurry reflection in the dark glass, and then I look at my hands. My apron is a detailed map of 1,000 long, exhausting days stained with the deep, stubborn green of crushed nettle, the dark rust color of iron bark, and the faint pale dust of ground bone and limestone. It is made of heavy, honest linen, worn soft by years of labor and frequent washings in the cold mountain river. My fingernails are short, and despite my very best efforts, a fine line of rich garden soil remains etched into the creases of my weathered skin. I smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and the sharp medicinal tang of pine resin. I am a creature of the soil, a living extension of the forest floor and the hidden, winding roots of the mountainside. I am bound to the earth by my work and my history. Then I think of her. I remember with painful clarity the way Serafina looked this afternoon as she stood behind her velvet-draped counter. Her hands were perfectly manicured, her skin as smooth and pale as the finest porcelain imported from the southern reaches. There were no stains of work upon her violet silk gown, no scent of heavy labor clinging to her dark hair, only the faint, ethereal perfume of expensive jasmine and something cold, something sharp, like the smell of ozone before a lightning strike. Her aesthetic is a curated masterpiece, a manufactured world where the messiness and the unpredictability of nature have been carefully filtered out, leaving behind only the shimmering, polished result. In her world, medicine is a precious jewel to be admired and worn. In my world, it is a bitter, honest root to be chewed and endured. A creeping, cold doubt begins to coil in the pit of my stomach, more biting and persistent than the winter wind outside the walls. For 300 years, the Laurel Branch has been enough for this village. We have relied on the slow, patient extraction of essences. The ancient way, a tincture must sit in the absolute dark for 3 full moons to reach its true medicinal potency, or how a poultice must be ground by hand with a stone mortar until the oils move just so. It is a craft of waiting, of listening to the internal quiet clock of the plants themselves. But as I watch that strange violet glow pulsing across the street, I wonder if Oakhaven has suddenly lost its ancient patience. In a world that can now buy bottled starlight and liquid sleep in a single heartbeat, who will truly care for the slow simmering decoctions of the long-forgotten past? I fear that my traditional methods, the very soul and breath of this shop, are becoming nothing more than dusty, irrelevant relics, destined to be forgotten like the names carved into the weathered headstones in the old kirkyard. I feel a sudden, sharp pang of obsolescence wash over me. I am the keeper of a dying language, speaking to a village that has suddenly discovered a new, louder, and more colorful tongue. The silence of my shop, which usually feels like a warm, familiar embrace, suddenly feels heavy and suffocating, like the physical weight of too many years pressing down upon my tired shoulders. I find myself questioning every recipe, every rhythm, and every tradition I have ever trusted, searching for a way to anchor my drifting, anxious mind. I turn away from the window and move slowly toward the back of the room. There, standing in the darkest corner where the firelight barely reaches, is the grandfather clock. It was built by my great-grandfather from the very heart of a fallen black walnut tree, and its internal gears are fashioned from heavy brass and seasoned hard apple wood. Its ticking is not a sharp, metallic sound that jars the nerves. It is a deep, wooden thump-talk that resonates through the ancient floorboards and directly into my chest. I close my eyes and let that steady, timeless sound wash over me like a slow river. It is the most honest and unchanging thing in the room. It does not care about violet lights, silk gowns, or the fickle whims of the village. It simply measures the passage of existence with a steady, unhurried, and dignified grace. Each tick is a profound reminder that time cannot be cheated, Not truly. The mountains took 1,000,000 years of pressure to rise, and the silver root takes a full decade of silent growth to mature in the frozen earth. There is a fundamental, unshakable truth in the slowness of things, a reliability that no amount of flash or glitter can ever truly replace. The rhythmic pulse of the clock acts as a silent return to safety, pulling me back from the dark brink of my envy and settling my frantic heart into a calmer state. I breathe in time with the swinging, heavy pendulum, inhaling the deep scent of the old wood and the cooling ash of the fire, feeling the ancient quiet strength of the shop slowly seep back into my spirit. I am Lyra, and I am the mountain. She may be the storm that dazzles the eye, but the mountain remains solid and unchanged long after the clouds have broken and drifted away. The doubt is still there, of course, a small, lingering shadow in the back corner of my mind, but it no longer has the power to paralyze me. It has transformed into a cold, sharp, and focused resolve. I need to understand the underlying mechanism of her miracles. If she has truly found a way to bridge the gap between the old world and the new, I must know how she has done it, not to imitate her or to steal her light, but to protect the integrity and the truth of what we do here. The village is deep in sleep, the snow has finally stopped falling, and the entire world is held in a crystalline frozen stasis. I look one last time at the violet light across the way. It flickers once, then dims significantly, as if the building itself is finally settling into a shallow, artificial slumber of its own. I know her routine now. I have watched from the shadows as Leo locked the front display and retired to the upper rooms for the night. The shop is dark now. The streets are entirely empty of life, and the only sound is the distant, lonely cry of a winter owl. I reach for my heavy, dark cloak, the wool feeling thick, coarse, and comforting against the back of my neck. I do not take the front door. The silver bell would scream my betrayal to the entire silent square. Instead, I move toward the back, through the familiar smell of drying herbs and cold, damp stone. I press my hand against the heavy, solid wood of the rear exit. I already know all of its secrets. I know exactly which hinge to favor, so it does not groan or protest in the night. Only the small side door of the crystal vial is left unlatched for the early morning deliveries. And tonight, that small, simple oversight is all the invitation I need to find the truth. The biting, predatory cold of the Oakhaven midnight is a physical weight, a sharp, crystalline pressure that seems to reach effortlessly through my heavy woolen cloak and settle deep within the very marrow of my bones. As I step away from the warm, familiar stone threshold of my own shop, the transition is startling and absolute. The air outside is so intensely frigid that it feels brittle, as if the darkness itself might shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces if I moved with too much haste. Each step I take across the street is a calculated, agonizing risk. The snow beneath my heavy boots is no longer soft or yielding, but has frozen into a delicate, treacherous crust that threatens to announce my betrayal to the entire valley with a single, loud, rhythmic crunch. I find myself walking on the balls of my feet, moving with the slow, deliberate focus of a forest predator, timing my shallow breathing to the low, mournful moan of the wind as it whips around the sharp, timbered corners of the sleeping houses. The village has become a graveyard of light and sound, every window shuttered and dark, every chimney reduced to a faint, dying wisp of gray smoke against the cold obsidian sky. I reach the side delivery door of the crystal vial, my heart hammer thudding against my ribs like a small trapped bird seeking escape. I stop and wait in the shadows, letting the absolute silence of the street settle heavily around me until I can hear nothing but the faint, distant whistle of the mountain air moving through the high pines. From the hidden pocket of my tunic, I pull out a small, unlabeled tin containing my own blend of Night Vale salva. It is a thick, obsidian black grease made from rendered bat tallow and the concentrated oil of crushed nightshade. specifically designed by my ancestors to deaden the friction of iron on iron. My fingers are trembling slightly, not from the biting cold, but from the electric hum of the transgression I am about to commit against a fellow practitioner. I dip 2 fingers into the cool, scentless balm and apply it with meticulous, shaking care to the heavy iron hinges of the side door. I work the black grease into every tiny crevice, every microscopic gap where cold metal might grate against cold metal. It is a slow, silent prayer to the gods of thieves and long shadows. When I finally turn the silver handle, the latch gives way with a soundless, oily slide, and the door swings open as if it were made of nothing more than midnight smoke. I slip inside, and for a long moment, the sensory shift is so profound and unexpected that it makes me feel momentarily dizzy. I had expected the familiar, grounding sense of an honest apothecary, the damp, rich earth of harvested roots, the medicinal sharp of pine resin, the dusty floral sweetness of dried summer flowers. But the crystal vial breathes a completely different language. The air in here is heavy, cloying, and unnervingly still, thick with the overpowering scent of spiced, simmering wine, and something far more disturbing, a sharp, ozone-like metallic tang that tastes of copper and lightning on the very back of my tongue. It is the sterile smell of a laboratory rather than the living scent of a garden, a place where nature has been subjected to intense fire and artificial pressure until it has changed its very state of being. My eyes take a long time to adjust to the dim, violet-tinged darkness of the interior. The shadows here are long, thin, and distorted, cast by endless rows upon rows of silver-capped glass jars that seem to catch and hold a light that is not actually there. The atmosphere is dense and vibrating with a low-frequency hum that I can feel in the roof of my mouth, a mechanical rhythmic pulse that feels entirely alien to the organic, breathing peace of my own workshop. I move deeper into the room, my boots making absolutely no sound on the thick, violet velvet carpets that Serafina has laid across the floorboards. To steady my frayed nerves and quiet the frantic alarm bells in my mind, I begin to do what I have done every single day of my long life. I read the labels on the shelves. I lean close to the shimmering glass, my voice no more than a phantom whisper, barely audible even to myself in the stillness. I read the names of ingredients that have never once graced the shelves of the Laurel Branch. Moon petal, I murmur, noting the way the dried white flakes within the jar seem to pulse with a faint, internal silver glow as if they were still dreaming of the night sky. Fangroot, a gnarled, obsidian-black tuber that looks as though it were harvested from the very depths of a volcanic fissure. Eclipse bloom, a flower so unnaturally dark that it seems to pull the very light out of the air around it, leaving a cold, empty void behind. As I whisper these names into the dark, I feel a strange hypnotic rhythm taking hold of my senses. The names are like a dark incantation, a litany of the rare, the exotic, and the dangerous. I trace the elegant, looping script on the labels with a gloved finger, letting the strangeness of the words act as a bridge, a way to anchor myself in this alien territory. The rhythmic, slow repetition of the ingredients: moon petal, fang root, eclipse blumax as a sensory loop, a quiet return to safety that keeps the rising panic at bay. The shop is a temple dedicated to the impossible and the immediate. I see jars filled with powdered glass that shimmer like diamond dust in the gloom, and vials of iridescent liquid that shift from a deep sea green to a bruised, metallic gold as I move slowly past them. Everything is polished to a mirror shine, everything is pristine, and everything feels dangerously, unnervingly fast. There is no dust here, no signs of the slow, messy, and beautiful reality of plant life. It is as if Serafina has somehow managed to bypass the seasons entirely, leaping straight to the final shimmering result without the inconvenience of the slow growth or the patient decay. I finally reach the main counter, the heavy velvet cloth beneath my hands feeling unnervingly soft and expensive. My eyes scan the dark surface, looking for the source of her power, the hidden ledger of her secrets. The violet light from the window catches the polished edge of a heavy, silver-bound volume. It is lying flat, its spine thick and reinforced with dark, supple leather, placed precisely in the center of the workspace, as if it were the primary altar of the entire building. My breath hitches in my throat. It is not locked away in a safe or hidden beneath the floorboards. It is right there, waiting for me in the dark. I move closer. The ozone scent growing stronger, the metallic tang sharper and more persistent on my tongue. The cover of the book is blank, but the energy radiating from it is undeniable, a low heat that makes the hair on my arms stand up. I reach out, my hand hovering just inches over the silver-edged pages, and I feel a faint, prickling heat against my palm, like the static before a summer storm. This is the heart of the storm. This is the origin of the starlight that has enchanted my village. Then I see it clearly. The book is not just a ledger of sales or a list of customers. It is her open recipe book, left on the counter as if she had only just stepped away for a brief moment to tend to a fire. The pages are covered in that same elegant, sweeping script I saw on the signs, but here, the writing is surrounded by complex geometric diagrams and dense notes written in a language that looks like a strange fusion of advanced mathematics and ancient, forbidden alchemy. I can see the words Loom Leaf, underlined multiple times in thick, violet ink, and next to it, a detailed drawing of a leaf that seems to be weeping silver tears into a glass vial. Wow. The truth is right here, laid bare under the cold, indifferent gaze of the winter moon. My heart slows its frantic pace, my vision narrows until all I can see is the dark ink on the pale page, and I realize with a shiver of anticipation that the answers I have been seeking are only a single, quiet turn of the page away. The absolute silence of the shop, which only moments ago felt like a protective and heavy shroud of violet shadows, suddenly curdles into something much sharper and more dangerous. It begins as a faint, rhythmic, and a terrifyingly consistent sound, a soft, repetitive click-click-click of heavy, sharp keratin against the polished violet floorboards. It is a slow, methodical, and patient sound, drawing closer and closer from the darkened corridor that leads to the silent rear of the building. My hand freezes mid-air, only inches above the silver-bound recipe book, as the temperature in the room seems to drop another 10 degrees in an instant. I do not turn around immediately. I simply stand there, frozen, listening to the sheer physical weight of the creature standing behind me. Each click of its claws is deliberate, punctuated by the low, heavy, and rhythmic breathing of an animal that is far larger and more powerful than any common house pet. The sound stops exactly 3 paces behind me, and the still air is suddenly filled with the faint, warm, and primal scent of wet fur and iron-rich breath. I turn my head with agonizing, microscopic slowness, every single one of my neck muscles feeling stiff and protesting against the movement. There, standing perfectly framed in the doorway of the back room, is Bear. The Rottweiler is even more imposing and formidable in the dim, pulsing violet light than he was when I saw him earlier in the cold street. His massive chest is a solid wall of dark muscle, and his eyes too dark. Unnervingly intelligent orbs are locked onto mine with a steady gaze that feels less like an immediate threat and more like a quiet, heavy judgment. He does not growl at me. He does not bare his teeth in a snarl. Instead, his thick, docked tail sways once, then twice, in a slow, hypnotic, and rhythmic motion that seems to mock my very presence in this forbidden place. He stands there as the eternal sentinel of the house, a living, breathing extension of Seraphina's formidable will, watching me with a degree of patience that is truly terrifying. I am a shadow out of place, a silent intruder in his sacred domain, and the immense weight of his stare is enough to pin me to the counter. The tension in the room has become a physical cord, stretched to the absolute breaking point. My mind races frantically through every defensive herb and every calming tincture stored in my satchel. But nothing feels fast enough or potent enough to counter the sheer physical power of the dog standing before me. But then, the high shadows in the very corner of the ceiling up where the heavy dust-covered velvet curtains meet the dark oak rafters begin to shift and move. A sudden, vibrant streak of orange-gold lightning erupts from the absolute darkness. Luna, my silent and faithful shadow, has followed me through the night after all. She does not attack the massive dog. She is far too clever and calculated for such a clumsy move. Instead, she launches herself with a sudden burst of chaotic energy onto a high, narrow shelf filled with Seraphina's most delicate and precious glass vials. The air is suddenly filled with the discordant, shimmering symphony of absolute destruction. Crash, shiver, tinkle, shimmering liquids of every possible hue, brilliant blues, molten golds, and iridescent violets splash across the floor in a chaotic, beautiful mosaic of broken glass and chemical fire. The jars containing the starshine balm shatter upon impact, releasing frantic bursts of artificial pulsing light that dance like terrified fireflies in the deep dark. Bear's massive head snaps toward the sudden noise, his predatory instincts momentarily divided between the human intruder and the violent, shimmering eruption of light and sound in his mistress's workspace. For one single precious heartbeat, the singular focus of the predator is broken. In that 1 second of perfect distraction, I reach deep into the hidden silken folds of my cloak and pull out a small, teardrop-shaped vial filled with a shimmering, translucent fluid. This is my invisibility draft, a secret recipe passed down to me from my grandmother. Made from the distilled petals of cloud lilies and the captured breath of a mountain cave. I pull the cork with my teeth and swallow the liquid in one desperate cold gulp. The sensation is immediate, profound, and overwhelming. It does not burn like fire. It freezes like the deepest winter. A powerful, cool, and minty chill washes down my throat and radiates outward through my trembling limbs, feeling exactly like a slow wave of liquid ice water moving through my veins. I watch, breathless and wide-eyed, as my own hands begin to blur at the edges and then dissolve entirely into the dim air, turning into nothing more than a faint, watery ripple before disappearing from my sight completely. I can still feel the cold air on my skin, but I can no longer see the boundaries or the shape of my own body. I have become a ghost in the machine, a silent whisper in the dark. The sharp, minty aftertaste lingers on my tongue, a crisp and soothing anchor in the midst of this unfolding madness. I stand perfectly still, barely daring to breathe, as Bear turns his heavy head back to the counter, his wet nose twitching and sniffing the air exactly where I stood only seconds ago. He can likely still smell the copper tang of the quill on my tongue and the cold scent of fear in my sweat, but he can no longer see the subtle ripple of my physical presence. The chaos, Luna created the rhythmic steady dripping of expensive potions from the broken shelves, and the distant, fading chime of glass settling acts as a sensory veil, drowning out the frantic sound of my own heartbeat. The room is a beautiful mess of spilled light and shattered dreams, but within that mess, I find a strange, crystalline, and silent moment of absolute calm. I move now with the silence of a half-forgotten dream. My invisible hand reaches out across the counter and grasps the heavy, silver-bound recipe book. I can feel the cool, supple leather and the strange, prickling heat of its internal magic, even if I cannot see my own fingers touching the surface. I tuck it firmly and securely under my arm, the weight of it feeling like a captured, beating heart. I do not look back at the broken glass or the confused, silent sentinel standing in the shadows. I navigate the thick violet velvet carpet by pure memory and primal instinct. Slipping through the side door I had so carefully and silently greased earlier. The sudden transition back into the biting, frigid midnight air is a physical shock to my system, but I do not stop to breathe. I run, I run through the deep white snow, my heavy boots making a frantic, rhythmic, and muffled thumping sound as I cross the empty moonlit square. Each breath I take is a thick plume of white frost in the dark, and my heart has become a heavy hammer thumping against my ribs. A wild, rhythmic drumbeat of pure terror and silent triumph that carries me back toward the safety of the long shadows and the familiar smell of wood smoke. The threshold of my workshop feels like a profound sanctuary of ancient wood and deep shadow as I slip inside. The heavy oak door thudding shut with a soft, final vibration that instantly cuts off the biting, predatory mountain wind. The air in here is a thick velvet embrace, still holding the lingering, fragrant ghosts of the day's various bruise-dried lavender, charred cedar, and the deep, iron-like scent of valerian root. I move slowly through the familiar darkness, my boots treading softly on the floorboards that groan in a low, welcoming frequency I have known since childhood. The hearth fire has surrendered to the deep night, reduced now to a thick bed of pulsing, orange embers that glow like the eyes of a great slumbering beast in the corner. They cast just enough flickering light to illuminate the tiny dust motes dancing in the stillness, turning the shop into a silent cathedral of amber and dark ink. I place the heavy, silver-bound book on the main counter, the weight of it making a solid, grounded sound that vibrates through the dark oak. My breath, still coming in shallow, frosty plumes from the run, begins to slow as the internal heat of the shop seeps into my chilled skin. A profound and necessary return to safety after the electric terror of the midnight street. A floorboard creaks in the back room with a familiar rhythmic sound, and Bach Kale emerges from the shadows, his heavy dark wool robe trailing behind him like a slow-moving cloud. He does not ask where I have been or what risks I have taken. He only looks at the book, his eyes reflecting the dying firelight with a sharp, piercing clarity that belies his years. He lights a single tallow candle, the small flame steady and unwavering in the still air, and pulls a pair of heavy brass spectacles from the pocket of his robe. Together, we lean over the stolen volume in the dim light. The paper of the book is cool, unnervingly smooth to the touch, and smells of that sharp, metallic ozone I encountered in the rival shop. As we slowly turn the silver-edged pages, the elegant, sweeping script of Serafina's hand reveals a hidden world of complex, geometric equations and chemical maps that make my head swim. But then Bas Kale's long finger stops on one specific, underlined passage, his breath hitching slightly in his chest. There, underlined multiple times in a violent shade of deep violet ink, are the words, Loom Leaf. We spend the next hour in a shared rhythmic silence, our eyes darting across the detailed diagrams of distillation and the frantic, margin-scrawled notes that fill the pages. It becomes increasingly clear to both of us that we were fundamentally wrong to dismiss her as a mere merchant of glitter and surface-level charms. Serafina is no fake. She is a master of a volatile, dangerous, and long-forgotten branch of alchemy that most modern practitioners would never dare to touch. She is using the loom leaf not as a healing base or a gentle tonic, but as a violent catalyst to force the other herbs into a state of hyperpotency. It is a technique that bypasses the natural, slow maceration process entirely. She is not growing or nurturing the medicine. She is essentially burning it into existence through sheer force of will and chemical pressure. The revelation is a cold shock to my system. She has found a way to achieve in mere minutes what takes us months of patient waiting. But she is doing so by walking on a razor's edge of profound chemical instability. Her shortcuts are masterpieces of efficiency, but they border on the reckless, pushing the physical boundaries of what the human body is designed to endure. Bake Kale sinks slowly into his high-backed chair, the seasoned wood sighing under his weight, and he begins to speak in a voice that is a low, hypnotic rumble, story designed to settle the frantic residual energy in the room. He tells me of the ancient forgotten history of the loom leaf, a plant that grows only on the highest, most unreachable crags of the northern peaks, where the air is too thin and cold for most living things to survive. In the age of the first healers, it was known as the mind stitcher. It was used sparingly, perhaps a single leaf steeped in a gallon of pure spring water, to sharpen the focus of ancient scholars, and to wake those who had fallen into the deepest, most unreachable sleeps. He describes the way the leaf's silver veins pulse with a natural, low-frequency electricity, a gift from the mountain storms it inhabits. His voice is a steady, monotonous, and comforting flow of information, detailing the botanical structure of the leaf, the way its oils must be harvested at the exact moment of the first frost, and the specific, rhythmic stirring required to neutralize its more aggressive and chaotic properties. Listening to him is like being wrapped in a heavy, weighted wool blanket. The history of the craft acts as a powerful, stabilizing force, a reminder that we are part of a long, slow-moving river of knowledge that cannot be hurried or cheated. The loom leaf, he explains, is a bridge between the physical and the ethereal. When handled with the proper patient respect and given the time it requires, it provides a clarity and a strength that is unmatched by any other root or flower. But the ancient texts are very clear. The leaf is a jealous and demanding mistress. It demands time to settle, time to be tempered by the cooling, slow influence of the moon. As Bas Kale speaks, the glowing embers in the hearth settle further into fine gray ash, the shop growing quieter and deeper in its nocturnal peace. The scent of the old paper and the cooling tallow candle creates a sensory anchor, pulling us away from the frantic artificial violet light of the rival shop and back into the earthy, honest, and reliable reality of Oakhaven's history. For a moment, it feels as though the immediate danger has passed, as though understanding the secret has robbed it of its terrifying power. But then, Batkale stops speaking abruptly, and the silence that follows is not a peaceful one. He looks down at a specific diagram in the book, a detailed drawing of a human heart surrounded by jagged, violet lines representing the intense effects of the starshine balm on the blood. His face, usually an unreadable map of professional calm, tightens with a sudden, sharp concern that I have never seen before. He points to a small note in the very corner of the page, written in a hand that looks far more rushed, jagged, and panicked than the rest of the book. It is a calculation of the decay rate of the loom leaf's effect. In her desperate haste to dazzle the village for the Yule festival, Seraphina has not tempered the leaf's inherent volatility. She has given the unsuspecting people of Oakhaven a shortcut to health, a sudden burst of artificial vitality that feels exactly like a miracle in the moment. But the ancient scrolls and Basi Kale's weathered memory both know the same dark, inevitable truth. Nature does not allow for such leaps without a balancing weight on the other side. A shortcut always, without exception, comes with a heavy price that must be paid in full. And as the first pale light of the festival morning begins to bleed through the thick frost on our windows, I realize with a sinking, heavy heart that the entire village of Oakhaven is about to pay it. The pale, fragile light of the early festival morning has barely begun to touch the thick, frost-covered eaves of Oakhaven when the heavy shop door is suddenly pushed open. There is no cheerful silver jingle this time. The metal bell seems to let out a dull, muffled thud, as if the very air in the room has become too thick and heavy to carry a clear sound. Finnick the jester stumbles across the worn wooden threshold, his usually bright, multicolored tunic now looking frayed, dusty, and strangely muted in the gray, cold dawn. He is a man who lives entirely by the volume of his laughter and the sharp, lightning-fast wit of his tongue, yet as he approaches the counter, he is wrapped in a complete and terrifying silence. His eyes, normally dancing with endless mischief, are now wide, bloodshot, and frantic, darting toward Basie Kale and me with a desperate, silent plea for help. He opens his mouth as if to speak, to perhaps offer a frantic greeting or a hurried explanation for his unannounced arrival, but absolutely no sound emerges. Not a whisper, not a raspy croak, nothing but the faint hollow rasp of dry air passing through a throat that seems to have been turned to cold stone. Finnick reaches out with trembling, skeletal hands, miming the desperate act of drinking from a small vial, and then points a shaking finger directly across the street toward the flickering, artificial violet lights of the crystal vial. It is perfectly clear without a single word being spoken. He had fallen for the glittering allure of Seraphina's mirthmy potion. He had sought a dangerous shortcut to the perfect performance for the great Yule festival, a way to ensure his jokes landed with more spark and his laughter carried more weight through the village square. The potion had undoubtedly worked for a time. I could still see the lingering, artificial glitter of the loom leaf on his dry lips. It had granted him a brief, brilliant hour of supernatural humor and boundless energy. But the volatile catalyst within it had now exacted its brutal, inevitable price. It had stolen the very thing he needed most to survive. It had frozen his vocal cords in a state of extreme hypertension, leaving him a jester who could no longer tell a single joke, a silent, colorful ghost in a suit of rusted bells. But Kale moves with a calm, practiced, and ancient gravity, guiding the shaking Finnick to a high stool near the warm hearth. He does not panic or rush. He simply places a steady, warm, and heavy hand on Finnick's trembling shoulder, acting as a silent anchor in the man's rising storm of internal fear. We know exactly what we must do to save him. We must brew a counteragent, a complex remedy of pure, radiating warmth and slow, gentle release to melt the chemical ice that has seized Finnick's throat so violently. The key to this cure is the cinder bloom, a rare and stubborn flower that grows only in the charred, nutrient-rich soil of lightning-struck oaks. Unlike the loom leaf, which flashes and fades like a dying spark, the cinder bloom holds a slow, deep, and radiating heat that mimics the steady, eternal pulse of a living coal hidden beneath the ash. I move slowly toward the back shelves, my fingers finding the heavy, hand-thrown stoneware jar marked with the ancient sigil of a rising flame. As I open the heavy lid, the deep scent of parched earth and ancient, cooling smoke fills the room, a dry, comforting, and honest aroma that immediately counters the sharp metallic ozone tang that had been lingering in my senses since the midnight heist. I places the dried crimson petals into the heavy granite mortar, and the true, slow ritual of healing finally begins. I take up the stone pestle, its weight familiar, solid, and grounding in my hand. I begin the work, crush, grind, rotate. I begin to work the brittle petals and the thick, fibrous pieces of root bark into a fine, rhythmic, and consistent powder. The sound is low, deep, and beautifully textured, a deep, earthy scritch-scrape that echoes through the quiet shop like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Scritch-scrape, scritch-scrape. It is a monotonous, hypnotic, and repetitive sound, one that demands my total focus and my absolute patience. I do not rush the process, for the cinder bloom is a proud ingredient and cannot be hurried by human hands. It must be coaxed into releasing its internal hidden fire through the steady, rhythmic application of pressure and time. I close my eyes as I work, letting the subtle vibration of the stone travel up through my arm and deep into my chest, matching my own breathing to the slow, circular motion of the pestle against the mortar. In this quiet moment, there is no rival shop, no stolen book of secrets, and no looming festival. There is only the cool stone, the warm root, and the slow, inevitable return to a state of balance. The powder slowly begins to take on a deep, glowing crimson hue, smelling now of toasted spices, sun-warmed stone, and the promise of a hearth. Bay Kale adds a few precious drops of distilled forest honey and a splash of warm, purified spring water, stirring the mixture with a wooden spoon until it becomes a thick, syrupy elixir that seems to hold a gentle light of its own, not the sharp, aggressive violet pulse of modern alchemy, but a soft, glowing, and amber warmth. We hand the heavy cup to Finnick. His hands are still shaking visibly as he brings the rim to his lips, the fragrant steam rising in gentle, swirling clouds around his pale, terrified face. He takes a slow, cautious, and tentative sip. At first, there is no visible change in his expression. He winces slightly as the intense warmth hits his frozen throat, his eyes closing tight in deep concentration. But as the cinder bloom begins its slow, radiating work, a visible change ripples through his entire body. The frantic, jagged tension in his shoulders begins to melt away. The frozen, hard line of his jaw softens into something more natural. He takes another sip, much deeper this time, letting the liquid coat his vocal cords like a layer of warm, protective, and healing velvet. We wait in the absolute heavy stillness of the workshop, the only sound being the soft rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the dark corner. Then, after what feels like an age, Finnick lets out a long, slow, and shaky breath. It is not a silent rasp this time. It is a soft, melodic, and beautiful sigh of relief. He clears his throat, a sound that is still rough, raw, and unpracticed. But it is undeniably and wonderfully human. He looks at me, his eyes moist with a profound sense of gratitude, and he opens his mouth once more to test the air. "Thank you," he whispers. The word is fragile, thin, and delicate, like a new leaf unfolding in the cold of spring, but it is perfectly clear. "Thank you so much." The restoration of his voice feels like a small, quiet miracle of our own making. A victory for the slow, the steady, and the honest over the fast, the flashy, and the artificial. Finnick begins to sit up straighter on his stool, the natural color finally returning to his wind-burnt cheeks as the radiating warmth of the elixir spreads through his entire nervous system. He looks like he is about to say much more, perhaps to tell us of the chaos he witnessed at the other shop, or to warn us of what other dangerous shortcuts Serafina has sold to the unsuspecting villagers during the night. But just as he forms his next word, the heavy silence of the festival morning is suddenly and violently shattered. It is not a soft jingle of a bell or a muffled thud. The shop bell rings with a sudden, violent, and commanding authority, a sharp, piercing, an authoritative peal that vibrates through the very glass of the display jars and into the marrow of my teeth. The heavy oak door swings wide on its hinges, admitting a sudden freezing rush of mountain air, and a tall, unmistakable, and formidable silhouette framed against the rising golden sun. It is her. Serafina is standing tall in our doorway, her violet silk cloak swirling around her like a dark storm cloud, and her eyes are not filled with the polished commercial grace of a merchant. They are burning with the cold, sharp, and focused fury of a master who has realized exactly what has been taken from her in the dead of night. She does not speak immediately, but the power radiating from her is enough to make the embers in our hearth dim in submission. The confrontation we have dreaded has arrived, and the quiet peace of the morning is gone forever. Serafina stands within the heavy threshold of our world, framed by the pale, biting, and crystalline light of the Yule morning. I had fully expected a sudden storm of violet lightning, a sharp and bitter accusation, or perhaps the cold, haughty demand for her stolen book of secrets. But as the freezing mountain wind finally settles, and the heavy oak door clicks shut with a soft, final thud behind her, the focused fury in her eyes softens into something far more weary and profoundly human. She does not reach for the silver-bound book lying on our counter. She simply stands there in the silence, her shoulders dropping beneath the immense weight of her silken violet cloak, and a tired, knowing smile tugs at the corner of her lips. It is the smile of a long-distance traveler who has finally reached the end of a very difficult and very lonely road. She looks at the counter, at the empty space where her secrets were kept, and then at Finnick, who is still clutching his throat with a look of pale shock. She does not need to ask any questions. She understands the weight of the price he has paid. The tension in the small room, which had been stretched thin enough to snap like a frozen wire, is suddenly and beautifully broken by an unexpected sound from the dark floorboard. Luna, my bright orange shadow, emerges silently from behind a stack of weathered herb crates. I prepare to catch her, expecting a sharp feline strike or a hiss of territorial defense. But instead of aggression, she lets out a soft, inquisitive whoop and musical trill. From behind the heavy folds of Seraphina's silken skirts, Bear, the massive black Rottweiler, steps forward into the firelight. The two natural predators lock eyes for a long, silent heartbeat, and then, in a display of pure, uncomplicated, and ancient grace, Bear lowers his massive front legs into a deep play bow. Luna responds in kind, arching her back and dancing sideways with a playful energy, her tail a fluffy, happy plume of joy. In an instant, the fierce sentinel and the clever thief are chasing each other in a rhythmic, bouncing circle around the warm hearth, their paws making a soft, muffled, and comforting thumping against the seasoned wood that sounds like the very heartbeat of the shop itself. Seraphina watches them play, her voice becoming a low, melodic, and soothing hum. When she finally finds the strength to speak, she admits, with a degree of candor that catches me completely off guard, that her potions were originally designed for a world that simply moves too fast. She calls them too sweet, too bright, too immediate, and entirely lacking the deep, stabilizing roots of the honest earth. She acknowledges that while she possesses the vision of the future, we possess the unshakable foundation of the past. She asks us now, not as a desperate rival, but as a humble peer, for our help to make her formulas stable and safe before the entire village wakes for the great festival. She realizes at last that while flash and glitter may attract the wandering eye, only true quality and patient craft can ever hope to sustain the human soul. Batch Kale nods slowly, the movement as steady and as certain as the mountain itself. He moves to the dark back room and returns not with an herbal weapon, but with a heavy blackened iron kettle. He prepares a shared pot of ember roast tea, a special blend of roasted chicory, cinnamon bark, and charred forest honey. The sound of the water reaching a boil is a rhythmic, bubbling song, a low-frequency, comforting hum that fills the shop with the heavy scent of a safe, warm harbor. We sit together in the dim light, three apothecaries, once divided by glass, gold, and pride, sharing the dark steaming liquid from ceramic cups. The soft clink of the clay and the steady communal breathing create a profound and lasting sense of peace, a return to safety that completely mutes the discord of the previous long night. The fire in the hearth finds a new steady life, glowing with a humble warmth as we spread the silver-bound book across the table. We have only one night, one final stretch of quiet darkness, to combine our collective wisdom and brew something truly magical for the people of Oakhaven. Our combined efforts now bubble with a slow, hypnotic, and steady rhythm within the massive copper cauldron that sits at the very center of the stone hearth. The intense heat from the fire is no longer a sharp or aggressive bite, but a gentle, radiating, and maternal embrace that keeps the brew at a perfect, unchanging simmer. We have spent the last few hours in a deep trance of three, weaving the sharp, precise science of Seraphina's southern alchemy with the deep, slow steeped, and ancient traditions of the Laurel Branch. My hands, still faintly stained with the dark green of the earth, move in perfect, silent synchronization with her pale, practiced, and elegant fingers. We are no longer competing for the attention of the village. We are harmonizing for its healing. I reach for a small silken satchel containing the final, most precious ingredient, black lotus petals, harvested by hand from the still, dark waters of the midnight fens. As I scatter them slowly over the surface of the bubbling cauldron, the transformation is nothing short of breathtaking. The liquid, which had been a thick, muddy brown, begins to swirl and shift with a life of its own, turning a deep, wintry, and crystalline blue, the exact color of the night sky just before the very first star appears. Through this sea of deep indigo, streaks of pale, molten gold begin to rise and fall in rhythmic patterns, like veins of pure light moving through a deep, quiet, and ancient ocean. It is the dream seer draft, our collective masterpiece. It is a remedy designed not for the physical body, but for the tired spirit. It is crafted to peel away the heavy layers of winter exhaustion and daily worry, allowing whoever tastes it to see the hidden, fundamental beauty of the world, as if for the very first time in their lives. I lean over the edge of the copper cauldron, my breath catching at the sheer sight of our work. The liquid looks like a galaxy on water, a swirling, shimmering, and infinite expanse of starlight trapped within a simple copper ring. It glows with its own soft, pulsing luminescence that requires no external flame, reflecting in the copper-tarnished walls of our shop like 1,000 tiny moons. There is no ozone smell here now, no sharp or metallic tang to irritate the senses. Instead, the rising steam carries the profound scent of fresh snowfall, clean mountain air, and the faint, sweet, and unmistakable promise of a coming spring. It is a scent that settles deep within the mind, instantly quieting the restless, racing thoughts and replacing them with a vast, open, and peaceful stillness. We begin to ladle the draft into small, simple, and clear glass vials that do not need to be faceted, mirrored, or gilded to hold their immense worth. The rhythmic, steady sound of the ladle dipping into the brew and the soft, repetitive clink of glass against stone becomes a perfect lullaby for the heavy work we have finished. The shop is filled with a profound sense of completion, a weightless and deep satisfaction that transcends all the petty rivalries of the past days. Through the thick frost on the windows, I see the first golden lanterns being lit in the village square. The long shadows are retreating. The festive music of the fiddles is beginning to tune in the distance, and the great Yule festival of Oakhaven has officially begun. The village square is now a distant sea of flickering torchlight and joyous, muffled noise. But here, from the quiet and elevated vantage point of our wooden porch, the world feels incredibly distant and beautifully still. I watch from the shadows as the villagers take their very first sips of the joint draught. I see the baker, the blacksmith's wife, and even the weary, mud-stained stable boy stop in their tracks as the liquid touches their lips. I see the pure wonder return to their tired, winter-worn eyes, the way they look up at the falling snow, not as a cold obstacle to be endured, but as a brilliant shower of diamonds falling from the high heavens. The deep lines of worry and age on their faces begin to soften and fade, replaced by a quiet, wide-eyed, and childlike awe. They are seeing the ancient magic of their own home again, and for one brief, perfect moment, the entire village breathes in a single, unified, and peaceful rhythm. I sit quietly on the weathered wooden bench, positioned safely between Serafina and Bakale. We are entirely silent now, our long work finished, watching the snow fall in slow, weightless, and hypnotic flakes that seem to drift through the air like frozen feathers. The deep purple carriage across the street is now heavily dusted in a layer of pure white, its sharp, aggressive color softened and forgiven by the winter's gentle touch. There is no more talk of competition or bitterness now, only a quiet, unspoken truce that feels as solid and as reliable as the deep frost on the ground beneath us. It is a promise that I know will last until the first green shoots of spring appear, a promise of a future where we no longer hide our secrets in the dark, but instead teach each other the delicate dance between the flash of the new and the foundation of the old. The distant, joyful sound of the fiddle music begins to drift further away into the night, carried off by the rising, soft wind and replaced by the low, comforting, and eternal hum of the mountain air. The village of Oakhaven is settling into its festival dreams, and our shop feels like a warm, darkened, and fragrant cocoon of safety. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a deep, slumbering, and peaceful red, and the shadows are long, soft, and protective against the timbered walls. Close your eyes now, traveler. The long journey through the winter snow is over. The fire is low, the shop is safe, and the ancient jars are silent on their dark shelves. The dreams of the dream seer are waiting for you now, filled with the light of the stars and the deep, comforting scent of the pine forest. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to worry over, and nothing left to fear. The mountain is steady, the storm has passed, and the entire world is at rest. Sleep well, sleep deep, sleep in peace.